Yo, that shit here crazy. This is typical Florida for y'all people. You know what I'm saying? Shit we dealing with here is ridiculous. Well, I heard this up guys, motherfucker, man. But yeah, man, it's like super stupid bad fucking weather. You know what I mean? Fucking shit back in with foul, but like, this shit here crazy. But, gonna make motherfucking lemonade out of these goddamn lemons. So, what we gonna do, this is my segue, we gonna do tornadoes versus motherfucking hurricanes. Deal with this weather after we get out. How the child?
Nothing wrong. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Nah, I definitely agree with that shit. Right. Damn, Beretta, man. Fuck. Bro, I know you got bicycle, man, but you gotta think sometimes. Shit. Some of this shit don't even call for. Bro, I was talking to my suckers on the only one who listen mirror on the wall. Who the really nigga in it?
So, believe it or not, that's actually was the premise that I was going to originally go with, the hurricanes versus tornadoes. And then one of the viewers was able to reach out to me, and it brought up a real interesting point, you know what I mean? Because outside of the wind and rain, I mean, they're really cut from the same cloth. So if we really were going to get into some real versus real comparison, I thought maybe they got a point. So I responded and asked them, okay, well, what would be a more appropriate subject? And this particular viewer was calling from out of California, where they over there by that San Andreas Fault. And they were saying that they more terrified of earthquakes than hurricanes. So I was like, well, that makes a whole lot of sense because I'm from Florida and I don't really know too much about motherfucking earthquakes. So I did some research, and pretty much what that turned into was a pretty I would say balanced debate topic. So without further ado, we're gonna get into hurricane versus earthquake, as a matter of fact. We'll switch it up at the last minute, let you know, man, you gotta be spontaneous on the fly. So because I'm more familiar with the hurricane, right, I'm gonna go ahead and put some facts out by these earthquakes that I just happened to find out. Now, obviously, earthquakes are very dangerous, cause a lot of damage, and they are fairly unpredictable. I mean, I know they have a lot of seismographs that measure the grounds. But first of all, I guess I should explain for those who don't know what an earthquake actually is, right? So these plate tectonics, right, that moves along over the goddamn mantle, they rub up against each other, and over time, it's like the pressure builds up to a point where they snap, causing what we know as earthquakes. So they can be violent. Some of them can be a couple seconds. Some have lasted a few minutes. Now, seeing as that earthquakes are a natural phenomenon, they've been going on just as long as hurricanes. But now with the earthquakes, they also have a lot to do with volcanic activity, and they have a lot to do with tsunamis. So just as the hurricane can spawn tornadoes, earthquakes can also spawn tsunamis. They can spawn the landslides. The motherfuckers also can like crack open the damn ground, and like big ass canyons and shit can like just emerge out of nowhere. Mountains and all that shit are all formed by some of these same processes. Now, I give the earthquake this as far as if we rating them based on which one would be more terrifying or which one is more dangerous. I give the earthquake this not. It seems to me that it's hard to predict an earthquake because most of the studies that I looked up, they was on the lines of due for one, or we overdo it. Ever so many amount of years, they expect a magnitude 7, a magnitude 8, all the way up to magnitude 10, which is the highest one that they have on their scale. but they don't have a precise way of tracking it or predicting it. It's pretty much like it could happen today, it could happen 10 years from now, but they are fairly confident that it's going to happen. Now, with that being said, as the population over there increases, these fault lines are geared to a lot of major land redevelopment. I mean, it's like nature is going to be uncontrollable by man, whether they realize it or not. Now, because earthquakes deal with the earth itself, it is a very formidable opponent towards the hurricane, because the hurricane deals with the water. A lot of water and the air and the wind that makes up earth as we know it. So it's pretty much like the earth and the water fighting with each other. But now, as far as with the earthquakes, like I said, I do give them the nod as far as spontaneousness. Like, them shits, it's hard to predict. I mean, you can't say, oh, one is going to hit San Francisco at 8 o'clock on Friday, such and such and such time. It doesn't work like that. That shit may happen, may not happen, but when it does happen, it's like you just got to be prepared and think on the swivel. Now, as far as the damage goes, to my knowledge, as far as everything that I looked up and researched, most of the violent earthquakes are going to occur around this ring of fire. It's like a big long line of volcanic activity, a lot of plate tectonics going on circles the whole globe. Shit goes all the way around. Now, all that shit over there in that ocean, especially that Pacific Ocean, when you're dealing with earthquakes and those fault lines over there, that's where the tsunami comes in. And I mean, if we're being completely fair and objective, I have to add that as part of the devastation of earthquake, just because that is very, 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 very likely that they spawn these major tsunamis. Like one of the major tsunamis that hit Japan, I think in 2004, had a lot to do with volcanic activity and underwater earthquakes that, disrupts. And if you think about it, if you ever took like a bath or, something with a big thing of water. If you shake that shit, like the whole container, everything on the water, like that energy transfers within the waves. So it is very, very likely that those underwater earthquakes trigger these big tsunamis that not only devastate the coastline, but I mean, I'm talking about they wipe out a lot of things, as far as sometimes all the way up to 5 miles inland. That's a lot. Like, that's a lot to just have a wave of water pushing through, you know what I mean? And pretty much flooding out the whole, reshaping the coastline as we know it. And for a lot of places, like they say, like Japan, Hawaii, places along the coast, these areas can be very, very devastated by tsunamis, just because of the simple fact that everything around it is water. You know what I mean? It's like it can very well be flooded and pretty much washed away. So earthquakes, as I did my research, I realized that they would be more comparable to hurricanes than a tornado. Tornadoes are pretty much smaller in stature. They are very dangerous. I don't want to make it seem like they're not dangerous, but they can also be formed within the hurricane. So I mean, I couldn't really compare it to a hurricane. But an earthquake is a totally, totally different animal, and it packs a big punch, and a lot of people die over per year from the earthquake. And I think what it comes down to is the unpredictability of the earthquake. Even though you live in an area where they're prominent, you can't say with any certainty any time, place, or within what area or region that it will occur. So I think anytime that you're within one of those fault line areas, they have to live within somewhat caution, and that got to be stressful in itself. I mean, just to always have to be on alert, knowing that shit, everything could be good. 10 minutes later, shit, your fucking house could be falling apart. You can have a big crack in the middle of your floor, your driveway, highway, or however you want to describe it. So the earthquakes definitely earned my respect. But now let's see how it faces up against its opponent in the hurricane. So as I just stated, man, like the earthquakes are very, very highly respected in my book. I mean, they definitely they earned a fierce reputation. But now let's talk about these hurricanes. Now, anywhere within the Gulf Coast, southeastern area of the United States of America, June 1st starts what they call hurricane season. Now, unlike earthquakes, hurricanes can be monitored. You can watch them. You can watch them shits form. Them shits are humongous. I'm talking about like the warm water absorbs so much of this energy, right? And what ends up happening is like a thunderstorm on fucking steroids. The shit goes up and it builds up all of this. The water evaporates to these clouds, get real nice and thick. Then you get a lot of the strengthening as the waters are warmer because during the summertime, you know, the sun has shined a little bit more directly on it. And coming from off of the Atlantic, I think that's pretty much where I know from most of them start from between that Africa in that region. I think over in the Pacific, they also have hurricanes too, but they call them typhoons over there. I don't know why they feel like they got to call it something different, but I know the ones in the Atlantic are referred to as hurricanes. Sometimes they also can form in the Gulf too. It's not just the Atlantic. But that's not the point. The point is that you can see it forming and you generally have a window of a couple of days as they're tracking its movements, which is unlike the earthquake, because the earthquake, that shit pretty much spontaneous. Now, the difference, one of those differences I should say, because it's a few. They have some similarities, but there are some key differences, is the area affected. Now, in the first segment, I already stated that a lot of earthquakes occur around what they call the Ring of Fire. It's pretty much a big long fault lines that circles the globe. So the reach is very, very widespread. It affects a lot of areas, but it generally doesn't affect all these areas simultaneously at one time, right? When you're dealing with hurricane season, it's the equivalent of having a bunch of people standing, like let's say standing in a building or standing in an arena or standing in a bar, just a bunch of people in one area, and somebody randomly getting like a fucking AR-15 or something and just randomly shooting into the crowd. The reason why I'm using that as an analogy is because you generally don't know what area is safer than others. All the way from Texas, all through that Gulf Coast, where you have Louisiana, Mississippi, pieces of Alabama, Georgia, obviously Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, even all the way up to Virginia and a little further up that coastline. All of these areas are going to be well familiar with this hurricane season, just because of the size and the level of impact that they affect. Now, just like the earthquake system, I think they go up to a magnitude 10. The highest hurricane is going to be a category 5. And it don't have to be no category 5 for it to come fuck your shit up. Like, trust me, I mean, they had plenty of documentations of, I mean, I think everyone still has a very fresh memory of Hurricane Katrina. That was back in, what, 05? But since then, it has been several more that has come through. And, like, you never, ever want to, like, your heart goes out for people that's affected. But if a major storm was headed in your area and then at the last minute it turned to another area, I mean, there's always going to be some good and bad on both sides. I mean, it's good that you were spared, but then it's bad because the person that wasn't spared is like, they didn't have no way of preparing because they don't stick to their trajectory. That's why I was saying it's one thing for an earthquake to be very spontaneous, that shit could just pop up. The thing with a hurricane, you can monitor it, but it don't play by the rules like how it's supposed to. most of the time they can generally watch the high pressure and the low pressure and pretty much see like what course it's gonna take. But when you're dealing with something of that magnitude, when you have that eye, I'm quite sure everyone's familiar with the eye. That's the little circle in the center. Right around that circle is gonna be where the strongest winds at. I mean, that shit is ridiculous. I'm talking about that shit flattening fucking homes, blowing roofs off, that type of shit. Now, as you get further and further out into the arms of the hurricane, I guess you would, they tend to get weaker. But we talking hundreds of miles, you know what I mean? I think them shits be so fucking wide that they cover states. So trying to predict where that center region is gonna go and which direction it's gonna take, which path it's gonna take, that shit is like, oh man. I'm talking about like you can monitor it, but at the same time it's like it's not as simple as that shit sounds. So even though you may have a heads up, it may not be as helpful as it may seem. Now, the reason why that's interesting compared to the earthquake, right? Is because most times, from what I've read, an earthquake is going to have a duration of a few minutes, but a hurricane is going to last, it could last weeks, man. That shit is devastating. It puts a lot of water and it puts a lot of wind and destruction as it constantly bombards whatever land that it's attacking. Now, some of the similarities within these storms are that earthquakes generate other natural phenomena. Like I pointed out, they have a lot to do with volcano eruptions. They have a lot to do with landslides. They have a lot to do with tsunamis. Earthquakes can spawn a lot of those things. Same thing with fucking hurricanes. Hurricanes spawns flooding, massive flooding. That storm surge is pretty much a mini little tsunami. They don't even realize that, right? Because you're going to get your high tides and your low tides. But normally, when a high tide is going to come in gradually. But when you're dealing with a hurricane, especially one that has a lot of mass to it, it's going to have a wall of water that is pushing in front of it. So as it's getting ready to near shore, as it's getting closer and closer to land, the water is getting shallower and shallower, right? So that means as the storm is approaching the land, all of that water that's in front of it is going to be pushed onto the land. So it's not going to register like a tsunami because it's not going to be as big and violent, but it's going to be consistent. That storm surge is nothing to play with. And because we're dealing with the atmosphere and the circle of motion, they very, very oftenly spawn tornadoes, hell of lightning. I mean, like some of the worst lightning that you probably will see. So they definitely have a way of spawning a lot of other natural disasters that come along with them. Now, as far as damage goes, I personally have never lived or experienced firsthand being in an earthquake, but I have seen a lot of the damage that they have done. I have seen a lot of the things that they do trigger, and that could very well generate a lot of loss of life. I know they've started fires, they've caused all type of problems from areas like California, areas like Oregon, areas like Alaska, Hawaii, Japan, a lot of those like Turkey. I think there's a few other places that I know have had some massive, massive earthquakes over the years. And I know a lot of people have lost their lives. And one thing when it comes down to trying to compare these two, like there's really no good solution out of either one. But a hurricane, to me, I just think the duration and the size is going to probably generate a lot more damage and a lot more death than an earthquake. Now, like I said, those numbers can probably be it depends upon, where you go to get your numbers from, but just based on my observation and just applying a little common sense, I would just assume that just because of the duration, and think about the amount of people who suffer drowning, who suffer, like trees and stuff falling on them and things of that nature. Within an earthquake, 9 times out of 10, within those 10, 15 minutes, it's gonna pretty much you're gonna assess all the damage. Meaning, like, if you can survive that initial shock, I think they have like an aftershock that comes through, then you're generally gonna be, you know what I'm saying? Okay, I mean, if you're gonna survive, then you're gonna know pretty much right after it's over that you survived. With a hurricane, even once the storm is past, when you think the storm is past, man, that shit got levels to that shit. Because if you in that center, it's gonna get worse. Then you're gonna get that eye, and the eye is gonna make you feel like it's over with. It's a pretty day, sun gonna come out just for that shit to reverse trajectory, and the wind's gonna blow from the other side. Not to mention the countless amount of power outages. I'm talking about some people neighborhoods stay flooded for days, weeks, and travel becomes almost impossible. I know earthquakes also make traveling a lot more difficult just because you don't know, like, power lines are down, roads are open. But in a hurricane situation, I mean, there's gonna be so much water, so much debris, and so much chaos going on that I've seen hurricanes completely devastate whole cities. Like, I've seen earthquakes devastate regions, like parts of cities, but I don't know of one to have devastated the whole city. Like I said, I mean, Hurricane Michael, I forgot what year it was. I mean, it caused a real big problem for Panama City. I know Harvey did a real big damage to Texas. And obviously Katrina and what it did to New Orleans. So what I'm saying, I'm bringing all these up to say is, I mean, it's been documented plenty of times, the power and the devastation of a hurricane. So even though an earthquake would be more comparable to a hurricane than a tornado somewhat, it still, in my opinion, falls second to the damage and devastation of a hurricane, just because of the whole totality of what it's gonna do. You know what I mean? It's like earthquakes, if you want to give them, the whole world. Why? Because, like I said, along those fault lines, I mean, a lot of places experience earthquakes, and I mean, the scale is on a lot of different levels. It's gonna be, some gonna be catastrophic, some is gonna be not as significant as others. Same thing with hurricanes. You know what I mean? It's like some of them, they become so common to, like, outside of like a category 2 or 3, a lot of people within within the region, they'll pretty much just stay put and just ride it out. You know what I mean? Just because they've been dealing with these storms for a while. But as far as the chaos and the carnage that they cause, I just think that the hurricane carnage lasts so much longer. I mean, there's places that have been hit by hurricanes like years ago that still haven't quite got back on their feet. You know what I mean? That's saying a lot. So Mother Nature is very fascinating. Like I said, with this season, we're doing a lot of things geographically, a lot of regional. And like I said, I was going because of that fucked up weather, man. That's why we started it off like that, man. I was going to do like the tornado versus hurricane, but then as I was reaching out, talking to a lot of my viewers, and especially, like I say, a guy from over there in California, man, they really made it a good point. Like I said, I like to get like feedback from those out there to kind of let me know like how y'all see it, and that it made sense. You know what I'm saying? That's my whole thing, is make it make sense, right? I mean, it's like shit, because a tornado is pretty much just like a finger of a hurricane. So the earthquake was a better comparison, but I still would give the edge to the hurricane. And since we pretty much coming to the conclusion, I would, as a bonus, I'm trying to decide what, if any, natural phenomenon would be considered more dangerous or devastating or more costly than a hurricane. And I'm thinking about like avalanches, I'm thinking about like wildfires, lightning strikes, I'm thinking tornadoes, I'm thinking all of these things, right? And I just can't see nothing outdoing a hurricane outside of a motherfucking asteroid strike or a comet or a meteor or something hitting the earth. I don't really see nothing outdoing the devastation of a hurricane on a consistent basis other than something falling from fucking space. So with that being said, my conclusion is I would rate the hurricane as probably the #1 natural phenomenon of devastation, of life loss, and especially property damage. So yeah, man, and that was this week. So y'all come and check me out next week and see what topic we'll have to debate, what we're gonna be going in on, and keep rocking with me, man. It's S.S.B.G Network. It's your boy 100K. You've been watching Versus. Thank you for watching.